My name's Mark, by the way. If you've never been to Stonebrook, it's kind of a weird place. If you've been to Stonebrook before, it really seems weird to you if you haven't been here for a while. As Joe said, it's different than some things we did for years and years and years. Lots and lots of people and exciting things. And we just made a shift, and our main purpose is to be able, it's sort of hard to explain. There are certain things you just can't share when you are a large church, and there were so many things that were in my heart that I wanted to share and wanted to take the time to sort of dive in. And you'll hear things here if you hang around that really won't be shared. I don't know of any other place, frankly, some things that we're going to talk about today. And it's just something that I needed to do, want to do, and it's what I have to offer the world and the body of Christ in general. So thanks for hanging out with us. I am going to talk for about 45 minutes today. We will allow you to ask questions. And by the way, as we go along, you can stop me at any time, raise your hand and ask a question, or you can text a question. If you're watching online, you can text a question. We have a really great question from the last time we were together. I'm not sure if we'll get to it today. We'll see how it goes. But it's so good to have that interaction of thoughts. In fact, the question that was asked before is something that I've never considered in my entire life. And I just think it's an interesting thing to share. And that's why we sort of have this format where we can just slow down and turn over every rock, look under every bush, and just do some things. It's what Jesus did in the later part of his ministry. I'm not saying I'm Jesus, and hopefully I'm not about to die on a cross or anything. But at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, big crowds, short, simple messages, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But then as his ministry matured, we get a lot more information of him with smaller crowds, smaller groups of people. In fact, at one time, toward the end of his ministry, he made a statement, and thousands of people left and never returned. And his response to his closest staff was, "Are you guys going to leave too?" But he wanted to get down to some of the nitty-gritty things that mattered. And that's sort of what we're trying to do here. I'm not sure how successful we are, but that's our goal. Now, what we do here every time we're together, and we don't meet every Sunday, is we talk about Jesus. We believe that Jesus is the full expression of who God is. Everything that Jesus does reveals God's will. Everything he says, every action that he takes reveals who God is, what God is like. And to me, that's the only purpose to ever study the Bible. Are you guys having a separate meeting over here? I said about that. That's my sister. Do you want to wave to the crowd or anything? She taught me everything I know. It's not true. But anyway, so we simply are looking at the life of Jesus all the time to try to figure out what God is like. And the cool thing about Jesus' life, or the interesting thing to me, is sort of the premise is Jesus is coming to say, you guys thought a certain way about God. They thought a certain way about God because of their experiences and because of the writings of other people that had experience with God. Those writings were collected into scriptures, and Jesus came along and basically said, most of what you think about God isn't correct, and I'm here to demonstrate something about him. I'm here to reveal who he is and how interaction and relationship with him works. Look at me to figure out what God relationship should look like. Now, we've been talking about a subject, and it's a subject that is talked about in some churches, is avoided in others, and it's a very difficult subject to me. It's really, really, really hard. And it is simply the subject of divine healing. The trouble, if you're going to look at the life of Jesus and say, okay, this reveals what God is like, this reveals how God wants us to live, this reveals how we're supposed to interact with God, you constantly run smack dab? Is that you full on into this, wow, everywhere he turned, everything he did, he was healing, which is kind of the whole purpose. He's coming to earth to restore things the way that God always wanted them. If you look at Jesus' life, you can basically say, so that's what God wanted. And this is what people are always struggling with, because if you look around the world, I know I was just so moved yesterday at some video coming out of Israel of some of the horrific things that have happened there. And you look at that and you're like, oh, dear God, how can these things happen? And that's just because I'm seeing them. Those things are happening all over the world all the time. There are people who, with various diseases and cancer and all kinds of maladies that people, chronic things, but then terminal things. People that are innocent, little babies that are all of a sudden they have cancer. Where did this come from? And it's really, really hard not to get discouraged, not to get angry, maybe even with God. Is this who God is? Is God having something to do with this? And so this is why it just weighs on me. And I'm not approaching this by any means from a standpoint of I've got this figured out. And that's why I love this, and I love that this group of people, you keep coming in and allowing me to sort of talk through this, because to me, if we're going to live like Jesus, we have to understand healing. We have to understand miracles. We have to understand what is God's will concerning this so we can connect with it and not be wondering, because people are constantly wondering, why? Why did this happen? Why did God let this happen? Where is God in all this? And unfortunately, the answers from so many religious people are answers that just simply don't satisfy me, and they don't line up with who Jesus is, so that's why I'm talking about it. But I don't approach it from a standpoint of having it all together, and I'll just share this, for example. In the past couple of years, I've watched 2 of my grandbabies die. One born, already dead, with a genetic disease, and the other one, after a few months, discovering a separate, totally unrelated genetic disease and watching this beautiful, beautiful creation die, and watching the effects that my son and my daughter-in-law went through with that. It was just horrific. I, personally, and the thing is, I've seen and experienced what I believe are miraculous healings over the years. Seen them in other people that I'm ministering to and with, and in my own personal life. And this is why I told the story of Peter, for those of you that are here, and we'll kind of go over that again. But just in my own self, like last week, this isn't a huge thing, but it is a huge thing to me. I was diagnosed with what they call alpha-gal. I wish they would call it alpha-guy, because that's what I am. But alpha-gal is an allergic to, my main concern is red meat. But it's any mammalian products in general. I think, and this will be only for the older people, I discovered younger people don't get this joke I'm about to tell. Since I can't eat bison, it should be called buffalo gal. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight. Come out. See, Liz, you're old. But anyway, doesn't matter. But so that is something. Did that come from God? No, it came from a tick. Yeah. You got that too? Here, you have that? This will become a support group here at any minute. Yeah. Let me just ask questions. Here, can we stop the clock? This doesn't count. You don't have to stop the clock. This doesn't count. I'm right now going through a list because I'm not. How did you find out you had it? You don't eat meat. Okay, you're no help to me at all. But some people can eat some other things, and so much to the chagrin and horror of my daughter, who's a nurse who thinks her dad's going to die, because what happened to me, we went to the lake. Remember, we didn't have church because I was going to the lake. This is what happens when you don't go to church. I'm a sinner. But we went out to eat on a Saturday night. I had one of the best hamburgers of my life. But I'm saying it won't be the last hamburger of my life. But we'll talk about that later. And so I woke up with my tongue swollen about 3 times its size and my throat kind of swelling. And so trip to the emergency room and then a test the next week. So at the moment, they say that I have alpha guy. Anyway, I'm going to call it alpha guy. But I have a list of 7 different things that I'm testing because I eat dark chocolate chips, and you're not supposed to eat those because they have milk. But I tested it, and I'm good with it. I ate it and didn't die, is what I'm saying. No reaction. Then butter. Butter was a big one. When was it? Friday night, I had 2/3 of a stick of butter on the various food that I eat. Grass-fed, grass-finished butter from God himself. That's what butter is. And so I'm good with butter. The next thing, and this will be strange. See, this has nothing. Is this even being videoed? I hope this is. So what do you guys do at church? I don't know. The guy's not even a pastor. He's talking about butter. I like pork and beans.
Frank and beans.
I can eat anything if I can chase it with cottage cheese and pork and beans together. Okay? But it's pork and beans. You're not supposed to eat pork. But we're going to try that tonight. Then cottage cheese, and this is the hard one, cheese pizza. Okay, but anyway, so I just want you to know, I'll be testing those. Huh? I do have an EpiPen. And see, here's an interesting thing, too, that I want to talk about regarding healing. And maybe I'll sort of chronicle my journey with this. Because I didn't mean to share all this, but my mother, my mother, I've shared this when I was 10 years old, maybe somewhere around there. Maybe not quite 10. When was the first time? 74 or 5? I was younger. Oh, I don't think. But anyway, Mom was diagnosed with, she had a malignant melanoma on her back, had it removed. But the doctor told her, maybe we didn't get it all. It could come back as something else. And lo and behold, a year later, 6 months, I don't know. I was a kid. I was just trying to chase frogs and whatever. But anyway, Mom was diagnosed with terminal. It had spread to her entire body. Lymph nodes, her lungs, she had lung cancer. And so she was given 6 months to live. The doctor sent her home. Of course, this is the 70s. Maybe things would be different now. I don't know. The doctor sent her home. Dr. Sugarbaker was his name. And said, you have 6 months to live. We've done all we can do. Have a nice day. So in the process, now we believed in the church that we grew up that God could heal you if he was in the mood that day or if there was some sort of miraculous thing. And that's, I guess, one thing that I'm doing with this. In general, when it comes to healing, the idea has been maybe if there was a special guy that came. Like in our church, there was a guy and he would maybe pray for people. And if there was a person, sort of like Jesus, if you could touch him or if he could lay hands on you and he has a certain power or she has a certain power. Catherine Kuhlman was sort of a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. And some pretty well-documented cases of, frankly, miraculous things that happen. But, if you don't get that thing, then there's really nothing you can do. And she began to hear some things, some of the things that I'm going to be teaching and digging down into. And she lived for 32 more years, maybe, something like that. But it wasn't just, there was a misdiagnosis. No, she wasted away, and you could tell, that woman she has cancer. And so she was healed and lived for 30-something more years. But then my mom died of cancer. And she died of cancer because, and this is strange, you guys came on a bad day. This sermon is going nowhere. Have you ever seen the show Dr. Pimple Popper? My wife, I don't necessarily watch TV because I'm a Christian, but my wife, she watches TV, and so occasionally I'll sit down in order to spend time with my wife. And so she watches this show, Dr. Pimple Popper. And Dr. Pimple Popper is a dermatologist who removes various and sundry growths from people. It's really cool. It grosses some people out, but I've thought about being a doctor at one time. I love it. But anyway, there are so many things. It's always a lipoma, seems like, or whatever. But my mom, a growth came up on the side of her head, and she wouldn't simply just go to the doctor and have that removed. Well, it ended up killing her. would have been pretty simple. Remove that sucker off the side of your head.
Take this quarter. Go downtown and have a rat gnaw that thing off your face.
Eventually it got big and she combed her hair over. She just wouldn't go to the doctor. Well, by the time she went to the doctor, it had spread and she died of cancer. So, was all that God? Why was she healed at a certain time and not at another? These are questions that most people don't take the time to talk about. But, like with me with the Alpha Gal thing, well, I'm not just going to say, well, God's my healer. I'm going to go have me a burger. Now, I believe eventually I'll go have me a burger. But at the moment, I'm going to do what the doctor says to do. There's nothing, and that's what I want to explain up front, because in the times, the churches I grew up teaching on healing, they were, I don't know if you've ever, I need to write a book about, just call it Stupid Christian Things. The things I've experienced in church, the stomping of glasses. Here's another thing. You're listening to a person talk about healing that wears glasses. Okay? I want you to see this. It's not that I've got all this figured out. I've got everything. I'm better than you. No. All I'm saying is I look at Jesus and I can't ignore it. And it bothers me that most churches simply ignore the fact that, hey, everywhere this guy went, when there was somebody that was suffering, he fixed it. Now, is there still suffering in the world? Yes, and that's one reason I'm teaching it, is I want us, if there's a thing there that helps us to experience life like Jesus experienced it. He didn't suffer from sickness and disease. Now, he suffered from being nailed to a cross. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. But he didn't suffer from sickness and disease, and everywhere he went, he changed the infirmities and the weaknesses and the sicknesses and the death and the disease. He fixed it to something that is very good. And I don't know everything about how that works, but I want to explore it. So that's why we're here. And he prayed this, and it really bothers me. He said this. And I have one thing in mind with what I'm talking about the last couple of weeks and this week especially. He said, may your will be done, talking to God. He said, this is how you're supposed to pray. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus was all about bringing God's will to the earth. That's why he was here. We as Christians decide then, in fact, my buddy Brian here posted on Facebook. Isn't it amazing that someone that old even knows how to get on social media? But he posted about, Jesus he was constantly doing healing and miracles, so the church decides, well, let's spend all our time talking about sin and hell. It's because, we don't want to face the fact that everywhere Jesus was, and we've made Christianity about what happens when you die. If you'll do this now, you'll get to spend eternity with heaven. And that sort of wraps up Christianity, folks. Have a good day. No, everything Jesus talked about was bringing God's kingdom or God's way of doing things and his will to the earth and making sure his will happens. Well, let's say that we were all going to heaven today. So you guys are thinking, this is a cult. There's about to be a suicide thing. Where's the Kool-Aid? Have I told you that Jim Jones' wife, a guy named Jim Jones was on the board, a little church I pastored years ago, and his wife made the Kool-Aid for the children's church. I always thought that was hilarious. But anyway, if we all went to heaven today, and when you think of heaven, if you ever think of heaven, what is heaven like? What's it like? Do you ever think much about, what is heaven like? Do you think, well, there goes a person in a wheelchair, or there goes a person with a terminal disease, or there goes a person who can't see, or a person who can't hear, a person who can't walk well. Is that what you think of heaven? What do you think of heaven? Love?
I think everyone's going to be around 30.
Everybody's going to be around 30? 30 is a great age. People that are like 18 or 19 don't know. They're like, 30 is old. Oh, no, 30 is amazing. I prefer 40, but I won't nitpick there. But when you think of heaven, you think of perfection. You think of Genesis chapter 1, and God saw everything that he made, and it was good. Very good, in fact. You can't look at a baby with cancer and go, isn't that good? Man, that's good. No, but Jesus said to pray, may your will be done on earth just like it is in heaven. That's the sum of Jesus' ministry. And I'm sort of recapping some things, but 3 things we learned from this is God's will is not currently being done on earth. So we can't judge by what we see on the earth whether or not that's God's will. And unfortunately, that's what Christians do. Well, this happened, or I'm experiencing this, so God, I don't know why God wanted to do that. Well, why do you think that's God's will? Just because it's happening. Jesus said that his will wasn't being accomplished on earth, or why would you pray? There's no difference between God's will in heaven and God's will on earth. None. Jesus said that the same will that's in heaven, you need to pray that that happens here. And God seems to need partnership, and this is the big thing, for his will to be enacted or manifested on the earth. God seeks for someone to connect with him, to help him. And there's lots of reasons for that, and sometimes I would love to go into detail about that. God's nature is not control. I've said this a few times, we say that God is all powerful, and by that we mean that God can do whatever he wants, and it's simply not the case. And I've shown that. I've demonstrated that with several examples from Jesus' life. So here's the question. This is where we have to start. If we're going to talk about healing anymore, is what is God's will? What does God want? My contention is God wants every single person, every single place, at all times to experience perfect health. Now, this is where I have to stop, and it's bad that I have to preface this, but I grew up, and people speak pejoratively of the health and wealth gospel. And I understand where they're coming from. There are groups of people that, in my mind, have taken it to the extreme where it's all about me and my comfort, me and my riches. And when you look at Jesus' life, that's not what it's about. But he is constantly concerned with, and especially every single person that comes to him to ask to be healed is healed. So we have to settle in our heart, is it God's will or not? This is something I simply do not question. I don't care what happens. I do care, but I mean, no matter what happens, no matter what I experience, my understanding of what God's will is based on who Jesus is and what he's done. And all through the 4 Gospels, especially when we have the cases of the individual people that are coming to Jesus. There are 19 individual cases. Of those 19 cases, 12 of those cases, the person's faith. Do you mind to say the word faith? Faith. It's a weird, sort of ambiguous, nebulous word that we don't define well, in my opinion. I'm going to attempt a little bit to define it. The person's faith is mentioned or implied as having some type of role, some type of determining process. It's a determination in the process of them being healed. Jesus constantly asks people questions. Do you believe I'm able to do this? Do you want to be healed? You know, if you can believe, all things are possible. He had interactions with people to see where they are. And this word faith, to me, has been misused and abused. It's one reason I didn't talk about it very much when I'm going to call it Big Stonebrook, because there's so much baggage that comes with it, where people have been in church and they were being like, the reason your life is the way it is because you don't have enough faith. And I want to just dismiss that. That's not what I'm saying. I want to help define it so we can get to what it actually is. Because this is very true. Faith begins where the will of God is known. If you don't know if it's God's will for you to be well, then you haven't taken the first step into receiving that from God. And the thing I'm doing is not about, because I'm not a guy that has something in my hands. I mean, I can lay hands on you, but I'm here to teach you something that you don't need a guy. You have a direct connection with God. And this is what I want to teach. But I want to give a new explanation or a new definition for faith today. Okay, this is Mark's definition. It's not in the Bible. But this is what I think it means. Faith is simply connection. Faith equals connection. And we'll see it through some of these stories. Some of these stories we went over yet, I'm going to go back over and hit some of the things we missed. But in my trade life, I started out as an electrician. My brother-in-law taught me how to be an electrician. I went to work for this company that my brother-in-law was working for, Jeff, and he was the electrician for this company. I was working in the summers while I was still in high school, and he taught me how to wire houses. I then went to vocational school, electrical trades, and then went to what is now Missouri S&T as electrical engineer. And so electricity is, to me, in the natural realm, and maybe it's just because I've been an electrician, is a good illustration of the power of God. And we'll see that as we see some things about that Jesus did. It will say power went out from him. The word in the original Greek is dynamis, where we get our word dynamite or dynamo, power. Well, voltage in the electrical world is power, but it's potential power. It's very similar. We always use this to try to explain what voltage is. It is a big, if you can imagine, like those walls over there are a dam to a lake, and behind those walls are a big thing of water. Well, the water is not moving. It's potential power. That's voltage. That's power. Well, that does us no good. It's nice. I mean, you can ski on it, and it's really cool, or you can attempt to, as we did on the lake, and we're unsuccessful. But there's potential power there. And the question is not, does the power exist? The question is, how do we access it to use it for some type of good? Well, there's lots of ways. You can go up, poke a hole in the dam, and now you have amperage. Or if you put a generator, if you put something that's turning there, as the water turns over it, you have amperage, and it's producing wattage. So we can talk about all those, and I could use example. We could teach you Ohm's law, but we won't. But how do we, with electricity, we talk about conductance. And there are certain things, if, like we have a receptacle somewhere, or this isn't a good example. Let's say this is a chair of electricity. It's so horrible. I didn't think this through at all. But it's an electric chair. So it's just sitting there. It's not bothering anyone. How could we get power to flow to me? You could touch it. Ah! He scared somebody. So you touch the electric chair. I made a connection. But what if I do this? This will be difficult for me. I'm not grounded. It's not flowing to me. Did anything change with the chair? Ah! Sorry. Did anything change with the chair? No. What is the chair's will? See, the potential that the chair has is what the chair is built to do. It's meant to, electric chair isn't very good. You're thinking of, if we could just get a minute, we could leave early. But, this is just a blob of electricity. And it's so interesting in Jesus' stories. The more and more I look at it, it's like, yes, there's a potential power there, and various people with various techniques and for various reasons and with various interactions with Jesus somehow connect to it. Now, there are certain things that are more conductive than others. Like I'm conductive, but if I had a 2x4 and I plopped it on the chair and held onto it, what would happen? Nothing. See, it's a different result. Nothing changed with the chair. The chair is the same. But the result's different because of the conductance of the thing that I'm holding. I'm not making a connection. And that's all that I think that Jesus is talking about when he talks about faith. I'm here, but God is not controlling. God doesn't do things where he's not invited, and we'll see this time and time again. But when a connection is made, amazing things happen. And that's, to me, what faith is. Now, Peter said it this way, I was careful when I picked that up. I was like, don't touch the chair. Goofy things. Peter said it this way, you know, God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Ghost and with, there's that word, what is that word? Power. Jesus was anointed with power. Where did it come from? It came from the Holy Spirit. God has power, and he anointed Jesus with it. He put that power on Jesus. Jesus is going around as a walking example of what God wants. He wants his power to fix whatever is wrong. Jesus went about doing good with that power. Everything Jesus did was good. And healing all who were oppressed with the devil, for God was with him. There's an enemy, there's opposing forces to God's will, this chair. There are opposing forces that are trying to keep you from touching the chair. But Jesus went about with that power and did good and healed everyone. Well, that bothers me because everyone I know isn't healed. So here's some stories, more things about it. In Jerusalem and Idumea from east of the Jordan, the news, this is really important, the news about his miracles had spread far and wide, and vast numbers of people came to see him. He'd healed many people that day, so the sick people eagerly pushed forward to do what? Touch him. Now, we talked about this, and again, I'm just recapping. When Peter walked on the water, Peter said, hey, can I come out there? Yes, come on. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water. That's an amazing thing. He did a miraculous thing. The power of God is keeping him afloat. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. He lost his connection. He saw Jesus saying, come, and he's walking toward him. And then it hits him. You can't walk on water. What's the matter with you? And he begins to look at something else. He lost his connection and begins to sink. The will of God didn't change. This is the big thing that I want to drive home over and over and over, because when bad things happen, we think, why did God? And it's not, why did God? In fact, Jesus is going to say something to him. Jesus immediately reached out and said, you have so little faith. Why did you? See, we're always asking, why did God? God is asking here, why did you? Why did you doubt me? We went through the whole thing that the word doubt actually means to change. So he's saying, why did you change? Why did you lose your connection? You were connected, but then you weren't connected. Whether or not we receive from God what we need depends more on us than God. But this is where I have to constantly come back to not get into this thing of feeling condemned and less than, you're not good enough because you're experiencing some malady or some suffering or something like that. No, not at all. And it's not a matter of, yes, I know if I could just be good enough, I could get to God. No. You don't have to, the chair doesn't care. This should be a t-shirt. Everybody would say, what? The chair doesn't care what you've done. It just cares if you make a connection, it'll flow to you. There's lots of things that we've been taught, and there's lots of things that we think that are like a 2x4, we think, I'm touching him. There's so many things that I just think we need to discuss and maybe get it out of our brains, but that hinder that. Now, when the people recognized Jesus, the news of his arrival spread quickly throughout the whole area, and soon people were bringing all their sick to be healed. People recognized, they heard about him, okay? They begged him to let the sick, again, touch at least the fringe of his robe. And all who touched him were healed, made a connection. They're making a physical connection. There's something there. But then at other times, because of their unbelief, he couldn't do any miracles among them except he placed his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. There was an insulator between them and what they needed, and it was the fact that they didn't accept him. They didn't believe what he said. He was amazed. The New International Version says this, and this is why I'm doing that. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village. He didn't just say, I've done all I can do. I was here. No, he began to teach them. There's some things you don't know here. And as their knowledge, Hosea says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. I'm never going to be the guy that is saying, if you'll come up here right now, or if you'll give $1,000, I'll pray for you and you'll be healed. And I'll knock you over and you'll walk away. That's just not me. I don't have that. But what I do have is the same thing. I'm backing up. I want to teach some things that I think I see, and I want to share them with you. So we talked about this last time. We're going to Mark 5. Are you still with me? Do you need to shake?
Shimmy, shimmy, cocoa pop, shimmy, shimmy, rock.
At all? Okay. We talked about this some. I want to hit it again. Crowds who gathered around Jesus. Jesus actually healed a man called the madman of Gadara. He was in the tombs night and day. He was bothered by actually probably thousands of what they would term as demons. And Jesus heals him, casts the demons out of him, and suddenly he's fine. This man was in the tombs day and night crying, cutting himself with stones. He was a lunatic, and everybody knew it. Oh, that's the graveyard guy. So Jesus heals him, and so the news, people go into town and say, well, he healed the guy, and he killed my pigs. But you should come out here if you know the story. And a crowd soon gathered around this man who'd been possessed by the legion of demons. This is why people said, if I'd see miracles, I would believe. Watch. These people just saw a miracle. He was sitting there fully clothed and perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. I'm usually afraid when they're naked and crazy. But this was the opposite. And the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. And so Jesus said, no, it's God's will for you to be healed. I'm going to heal you. As Jesus was getting into the boat, they asked him to leave. So he left. He's not upset about it. There's simply nothing he can do to help. These people haven't accepted him. We'll see over and over where they accepted him and made a connection, healing could flow. And then he tells the guy you can't go with me. Go back and teach them. Go back and show them. Tell them what God has done for you and how merciful he has been. God is merciful. It's not just about sin, it's about healing. So Jesus got in the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Now, this is sort of what we ended with last time, and we're going to end with it this time. But I'll try to hit a few things we didn't talk about. The leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. Breaks my heart. My little daughter is dying. If you've ever had a little daughter, this hits you right here. My little daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her so she can live. It's very interesting as you look through the various cases of Jesus healing people, the different methods that he used. Here, this is where this person's faith is. He believes if this man comes and puts his hands on my daughter, she will live. So Jesus went with him. He didn't say, this is God trying to teach you something. He didn't say, it's not always God's will. No, in every single case, I want you to see that. Jesus went with him. That's where his faith is. We see other instances where Jesus is on his way to the house to heal a young person just like this. And the person sends some friends of his and says, no, you don't have to come to my house. Just speak the word from where you are. They'll be healed. And Jesus marveled at his faith. He said, I haven't seen this great faith in Israel. And it wasn't a Jewish person that was saying it. It was a Gentile. He was a Roman centurion. That's where his faith was. Just say the word. This is what gives me great comfort. This is where my mother was healed, basically believing this, and the different cases where I've experienced it and ministered it to other people is this is what he said. Just believe it. And the servant was healed. But it doesn't matter. That's where his connection was. Jairus' connection is, if you can lay your hands on her, she will be healed. Now, don't forget that he said that. He said that. If you'll lay hands on her, she will live. So Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. As we talked about last time, this is called a Markan sandwich. It's where Mark starts to tell a story. Sometimes it's frustrating. He starts to tell, it's just like this, Mark. He starts to tell a story, and he goes, okay, hold that one right there. I'm going to tell another story now. And then he comes back to the story. I don't always come back. I forget that we started the story. But this is called a Markan sandwich. Sometimes my Markan sandwiches just have bread on the bottom. But anyway, this is Markan sandwich. A woman in the crowd, now put yourself there. Here's Jesus. He's not walking like this. That's weird. But he's walking with this crowd of people surrounding him. There's this woman with constant bleeding. Now, we're about to read a story of a woman that's about to be healed. And there's lots of interesting principles in it that we can learn. Okay? So pay attention. Everything that she does is important. She had suffered a great deal for many years. She'd spent everything she had with the doctors. She's gotten worse. She had, this is so important, and I know it's a weird thing we do. She had what? She had heard about Jesus. This is so important. She had heard about Jesus. What did she hear about Jesus? How, though? See, I just read various verses, and there was a reason where it says the crowds pressed forward to touch him, and everybody that touched him was healed. And there's also, as I mentioned last time, the last book of the Bible, of the Old Testament, Malachi, the last chapter, gives a prophecy concerning the Messiah that will come. It says the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. The word wings is outer garments. It's the corner of the robe that rabbis wore. Okay? There's healing there. She may believe, well, this is the Messiah, if I can just touch his garment. But she didn't hear, I don't know, sometimes he doesn't heal people. He tells them, you'll just have to stay that way. He tells them, you're glorifying me with this. She had to have heard everyone, that's why I read those other scriptures, and all who touched were healed. If it's not for everyone, I don't know if it's for me. I may be the one that can win. It's like the lottery in reverse. Some of you actually think you're going to win the Powerball. You're not. Okay? But you think you are. You're still playing. It could happen. See? But in the reverse, if everybody doesn't get healed, if everybody doesn't win, you're not, I'll be the one that I'll win that lottery. It has to be everyone. She heard that, so she came up behind him and touched his robe. Now this is important, and I may not get to the end, and maybe I'll talk more about this later, but this is where it can get kind of weird. For she thought to herself, NLT, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. The New King James Version says it this way. For she said. She said, if I only may touch his clothes, I shall be well. Now I'm going to start something here, and don't run away, don't leave. Don't cast stones at me and think I'm just the power of positive thinking guy, because I'm not. But again, if I'm going to look at the life of Jesus, there's things he said and there's things he did and there's things his followers did that point to something that has been taken to an extreme, and I've backed away from it because I didn't want to be numbered with the people that are stupid. Some of you are thinking, well, you haven't succeeded. She said, she heard something, and then she said something. She said, if I can just touch the hem of his garment. Now see, Romans tells us that faith comes by what you hear. When you hear something, that's why you don't have to try. You don't have to try to get faith. You don't have to try to get connection. Electricity happens when you take a copper wire and you touch that. Just, if you have faith for that, Like I have faith concerning electricity, what I've heard. I've had to work big voltage with gloves on that they said these gloves will protect you up to 10,000 volts. Of course, I did the same thing there with the guys that were with me. But I had faith in that. But anyway, for she said something. Faith came simply by what she heard. You don't have to work up faith. You don't have to try to be good. You just have to hear. If you'll hear something, faith will automatically come. Those of you that, your husband tells you you're beautiful all the time. That's you, Jeannie. Talking to Jeannie there. Faith will come for that. Whatever you hear as a child, if you hear, you are really good at that. Faith will come. It's just natural. For she kept saying, the Amplified says, for she kept saying, if I can only touch his garment, I shall be restored to health. So faith comes from hearing. That's what I said. I'm going to say this. I'm going to do this, and then we'll return here next time. I talked about foolishness for about 5 minutes, so give me about 5 minutes, and then you can go home. It'll be early from what's normally. Bag Seed Junkie sent me a friend request. I don't even know what that means. This is a story about Paul, and then we'll come back to the woman with the issue of blood next week. This is a triple-decker American sandwich because I'm going somewhere else. And we're going to talk about Paul some more next week. In Acts 14, Paul and Barnabas they're going around, they're starting churches, they're telling people about Jesus. When a violent attempt was made by both the Gentiles and Jews to abuse and stone them, they became aware of it, and they went to Derbe, cities, Lystra and Derbe. Now notice this. And there they were preaching the gospel. Now, those of you that have been in church, what is the gospel? What is the good news? It's called good news. There they're preaching the gospel. What's the gospel? The truth about God. When you think about, because church say this all the time, we preach the gospel. What does that mean? Hell is hot and it's forever. What is the gospel? Jesus died to forgive your sin. Isn't that kind of what the gospel is? Okay, just keep that in mind. Because there, they were preaching the gospel. And in Lystra, there was a certain man without strength in his feet, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This is a guy, never has walked his entire life. This man, what's that next word? Heard. The woman heard something about Jesus. This man heard Paul speaking. Whoops, sorry. Paul, observing him, and I have to picture, like here's the guy, I'll be the guy, and Paul. Here's the guy, somebody brought him there, and he's listening to Paul speak. Okay? What is Paul speaking? What's he speaking? The gospel. So he heard Paul speaking. Paul observing him intently. And seeing, King James says perceiving, that this guy, had, what did he have?
Faith.
Faith for what? Where did he get that? Do what? How did he get that? Hearing. What did he hear? So what must of necessity be an integral, foundational part of the gospel in order for you to get faith to be healed? He must have heard that not only would Jesus die to save you, healing is a part of it. They're preaching the gospel, and all of a sudden, a guy gets faith to be healed. Did he work for it? Did he get any better? Did he repent of his sins? Did he do good works in the neighborhood? No. He just heard a dude speak. Makes me cry. Faith for healing came. Now, let me ask you a question. There's going to be a couple more minutes. Just stick with me. Is he healed? Nope. So you can have faith to be healed. A person will say, why did that person die? They had such great faith. Here's a guy that has faith to be healed, and he's not healed. These are some things that I just want to share. I don't know everything. I'm simply saying there's a guy sitting there that's not healed, and he has faith to be healed. Why isn't he healed? Paul saw that he had faith to be healed, and I'll leave you with this. And the next word, Paul, seeing that he had faith to be healed, said. Faith to be healed is released by what we say. The woman with the issue of blood heard Jesus heals people, you can just touch him. So she said, if I can just touch his garment, I will be healed. Jairus said, if you'll lay your hands on her, she will live. And he stood up. Paul released the power of God. The connection was made between his faith and the power by what Paul said. Well, I wonder if things could happen in our life by what we believe and what we say. I kind of think so. Anyway, stood up straight and he leaped and walked. So we'll talk more about that next time. You guys have questions? I don't know. Here's my thing, Eric. If I want to know what I'm doing wrong, I ask my wife. Sorry. This is why I talk about Peter. This is why I tell the story of my mother. The main thing I'm trying to get us to see right now is it's not dependent on God. The responsibility isn't on God. And there seems to be, like with Peter, a time where he's got a good connection and then he loses the connection. It happens that way with electricity. It happens with signals if you're trying to transmit. And so are there things where I'm just trying to go through the motions? You know, there's all kinds of things we could talk about. For example, throughout the New Testament, Paul gives an example to the people at Corinthians. He says, you guys, when you're receiving communion, you're not honoring the Lord's body. Meaning, number one, you're not walking, because all of Corinthians is about them walking in love and not being selfish. And also, it could also be that you're not understanding that Jesus' body was by his stripes you were healed. Jesus' sacrifice also brought healing. You're not remembering that, because he said, do this in remembrance of me. Paul's saying remembering. And he said, for this reason, many of you are sick. And some of you died early. There's a reason that you're not making a connection. Now, what that is, I don't know. There are times in my life where, okay, I've heard in the past, and I've been healed in the past. Well, maybe I'm just going through life and depending on what I have heard. Maybe I need to refresh myself on that. With copper wires or with aluminum wires, sometimes corrosion over time. You got to take that loose, scrape that off of there, hook it back. I don't know. It's something that we could talk about a lot. But the main thing is God's will didn't change. That's the thing I'm after, is it's not dependent totally on God. It's more dependent on us making the connection. Let's do the husband and wife thing. Have you ever been through a time where it seems like, well, I'm doing the thing I've always done. I brought her flowers on Valentine's Day. I don't do that. My wife doesn't want flowers on Valentine's Day. She wants flowers on April 21st. Do you know what April 21st is? Nothing. She doesn't even want flowers that much. But, okay, I'm going through the same things, and I'm doing the same thing I always was, but it just seems stale. You know what I mean? To where I need to work on that relationship, and you reconnect. We even talk about, well, I'm going away for the weekend. My wife and I we need to reconnect. Well, what do we mean by that? And this is the part with this that is hard for me to explain. I can see it. There it is. And I can't explain it very well. that the difference in Jesus' ministry is his relationship, his connection with God. Everything came out of that relationship. That's why he spent time. He would go get up in the morning and go spend time with him. And we Christians, we go, oh, that's the key. I have to get up early. No, he just did it because he loved him. And that's what your wife wants. And it's not that God is saying, well, if you don't do it, you haven't spent any time with me, so I'm not going to heal you. No, there's just something has developed over time that I'm not making that connection anymore. God is still there. He's the Father sitting on the porch waiting for us to return. And so sometimes it's a matter of, let me go back to my roots. It's hard sometimes not to get into this works thing of, okay, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. It's not at all about that. It's about relationship. And I'm not helping you, I can tell. But Miss Dallas? There are sometimes. That's where you will see where Jesus will ask people connection. It's almost like he's trying to remove the clutter and the interference. We used the illustration a few weeks ago where if I'm trying to call someone on the radio in the middle of a war, there's interference. There's someone trying to jam the signal. There's missiles flying by that are, we're not making a connection somehow. Well, the commander, the general, whoever, still wants you to accomplish your mission and still wants you to be safe in the process. You're just not getting through. That is true. We live in a war zone, and that's part of it. I like to talk about that a lot. But that's what I think you're starting to maybe see it is the main thing. The takeaway point is God's will doesn't change. God's will doesn't change. There's interference. There's all kinds of crap. There's all kinds of things that are trying to keep us from being healed. Jesus healing people caused thousands of people to hear his message. Well, of course the enemy is trying to stop that. Of course the enemy is trying to stop it today. In fact, the subject of healing, that's why I'm doing this, is because I've always said this about Satan. He doesn't care what ditch you're in. And with so many churches, if they believe in healing, he pushes them to this ditch where, well, you're not even a good Christian if you're sick. I grew up with that. You feel condemned. You go to church, you have to hide that you have a cold. I don't know. He pushes you to that extreme and this weirdness, or to the other extreme that God doesn't want it. But he doesn't want us to really get this and be people that can help others to experience what I believe is God's will for them to be healed. I didn't do a good job with those questions. Have any others? If you'll remind me. Yeah, there is an aspect of that, but I don't hate the term. Excuse me. There's so many terms that have baggage with it. And like spiritual warfare, when I hear spiritual warfare, I went to Bible school with guys, and I won't actually talk in tongues, although I can. And I don't know if I'll be able to mimic it without actually talking in tongues. But they got into this thing called warring tongues. And they walked around from class to class. Shandai, Shandai, Shandai. That's not what they said. Okay. They walked around warring in the spirit, supposedly. They're just full of crap. So I have a hard time sometimes with the subject of spiritual warfare. It's no more than what Jesus experienced in the wilderness when he was tempted to bow his knees to Satan so that all the kingdoms of the world would be his. And he said, no, it's written, you shall worship the Lord God, and him only shall you serve. That's spiritual warfare. You know what I mean? But it is recognizing there is opposition, and how do I navigate through it, eliminate it? In fact, we will talk about it because I'm going to talk about Paul's thorn in the flesh. So if you'll come back next time, we'll talk about that more.